Hi, I'm Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
The November fog of 1894 had settled upon London with unusual persistence, transforming the familiar thoroughfares into a maze of grey shadows and muffled sounds. From the windows of our lodgings at 221B Baker Street, the gas lamps appeared as mere smudges of amber light, struggling against the oppressive gloom that had shrouded the city for 3 consecutive days. It was on such an afternoon, when the very air seemed thick enough to cut with a blade, that there came to us a visitor whose distress was as palpable as the mist that clung to her dark travelling cloak. I had been occupied with updating my notes on a recent case involving a forged will, while my friend Sherlock Holmes lay stretched upon the sofa, his long frame draped in his familiar mouse-coloured dressing gown, his keen grey eyes fixed upon the ceiling as wisps of tobacco smoke curled upward from his pipe. The peculiar quality of his stillness suggested that his mind was engaged in one of those intricate processes of deduction that I had learned to recognize and respect, though the subject of his contemplation remained, as usual, a mystery to me. Mrs. Hudson's gentle rap upon our door preceded the entrance of a lady whose bearing immediately commanded attention. She was perhaps 30 years of age, with the refined features and elegant carriage that spoke of aristocratic breeding, yet her pale complexion and the slight tremor in her gloved hands betrayed an inner turmoil that no amount of social training could entirely conceal. "Mr. Holmes," she began, her voice carrying the cultured tones of Mayfair society, "I am Lady Catherine Blackwood. I come to you in the utmost desperation, for a crime has been committed that defies all rational explanation, and Scotland Yard has proven themselves utterly helpless in the matter." Holmes had risen with fluid grace upon her entrance, his pipe forgotten as his attention focused entirely upon our visitor. "Pray be seated, Lady Blackwood," said he, indicating the chair opposite his own. "Dr. Watson is my trusted colleague and may be spoken to with complete confidence. Now then, what is this crime that has so thoroughly confounded our friends at the Yard?" Lady Blackwood arranged her skirts with automatic precision, though I observed that her fingers continued to work nervously at the clasp of her reticule. "Mr. Holmes, I scarcely know how to begin, for the very words sound like the ravings of a madwoman. 3 nights ago, someone stole my husband's shadow." I confess that I started at this extraordinary statement, but Holmes merely leaned forward with that expression of intense interest that I had seen kindle in his eyes when presented with a problem of unusual character. "Your husband's shadow, you say? Pray continue, Lady Blackwood. I find that the most impossible-sounding crimes often yield to the most mundane explanations." She drew a shuddering breath before continuing. "Lord Blackwood is, as you may know, a collector of rare gemstones and curiosities from the Orient. Among his most prized possessions is a diamond of extraordinary properties acquired during his diplomatic service in India. The natives called it Kalachaya, the Black Shadow, for its remarkable ability to absorb light rather than reflect it. When viewed under proper illumination, the stone appears to cast a shadow within itself, a darkness so profound that it seems to possess substance and weight." "Fascinating," murmured Holmes. "And this remarkable gem has vanished." "In the most impossible manner imaginable," Lady Blackwood replied, her composure beginning to crack. "The diamond was kept in Lord Blackwood's private study, secured within a specially constructed display case of his own design. The case is fashioned of the finest crystal, mounted upon a pedestal of black marble, and protected by locks that were made by Brahma himself. My husband possesses the only key, which he keeps upon his person at all times." Holmes had begun that restless pacing which invariably accompanied his deepest concentration. "And the circumstances of the theft?" "That is precisely what makes this affair so maddening," she continued. 3 nights ago, Lord Blackwood retired to his study after dinner, as is his custom, to examine his collection. He unlocked the case, removed the diamond for closer inspection under his reading lamp, and then, according to his account, replaced it and secured the lock before stepping away to pour himself a brandy. When he turned back to the case, not 30 seconds later, the diamond had vanished. The case remained locked completely. The key had not left his hand. The crystal was unbroken, unmarked, without so much as a fingerprint upon its surface. Yet the velvet cushion within bore the clear impression of the stone, as though its shadow had been permanently burned into the fabric. I found myself leaning forward despite my natural skepticism. Surely there must be some explanation. Could your husband have been mistaken about replacing the stone? Lady Blackwood shook her head emphatically. Lord Blackwood is many things, Dr. Watson, but absent-minded is not among them. Moreover, he immediately summoned the household and ordered a complete search of the study. Every book was examined, every drawer opened, every inch of carpet scrutinized. Nothing. Inspector Lestrade arrived within the hour and conducted his own investigation with equal thoroughness. The windows were locked from within, the chimney too narrow for human passage, and the door had remained under Lord Blackwood's direct observation throughout. Holmes ceased his pacing and fixed our visitor with that penetrating stare that seemed to look directly into one's soul. Lady Blackwood, you mentioned that this occurred 3 nights ago. Why have you waited until now to consult me? A flush of embarrassment coloured her pale cheeks. Lord Blackwood forbade it initially. He was convinced that the solution would present itself through conventional investigation. However, yesterday morning brought a development that changed his mind entirely. Indeed? We received a letter, Mr. Holmes, a single sheet of expensive paper bearing no signature or identifying marks, containing only these words: "The shadow has found its master. If you would have it returned, place £1,000 in gold sovereigns beneath the statue of Nelson at midnight tomorrow. Come alone, or the shadow shall remain forever lost." Holmes's eyes glittered with that predatory intensity that marked the beginning of a hunt. "You have brought this letter with you?" Lady Blackwood produced a folded paper from her reticule and handed it to Holmes, who examined it with his magnifying glass, holding it to the light and studying both the paper and the handwriting with minute attention. "The paper is of the finest quality," he observed, watermarked with the crest of Wigmore and Sons, stationers to the nobility. "The ink is of a particular shade of blue-black that suggests a fountain pen of German manufacture. The handwriting is educated, controlled, yet there is a slight tremor in the formation of certain letters that indicates either advanced age or extreme nervousness." He set the letter aside and fixed Lady Blackwood with an inquiring gaze. "Now then, I must ask you to think carefully. Has Lord Blackwood any enemies? Anyone who might harbour resentment sufficient to attempt such an elaborate theft?" Lord Blackwood's diplomatic career necessarily created certain tensions, she admitted reluctantly. There was the matter of the Rajput succession, in which his recommendations influenced the Crown's decision regarding the rightful heir, and more recently his opposition to certain mining concessions in Burma has earned him the enmity of several commercial interests. "Most illuminating," said Holmes, reaching for his coat. "Lady Blackwood, Dr. Watson and I shall call upon your husband this afternoon. I trust he will receive us." "Oh yes, Mr. Holmes, indeed he is most eager to meet you, though I fear his pride has been considerably wounded by this affair." As our visitor took her leave, I observed Holmes standing at the window, gazing out into the swirling fog with that distant expression that indicated his mind was already racing ahead, assembling the scattered pieces of this extraordinary puzzle. "Well, Watson," said he, turning from the window with a slight smile, "what do you make of Our Lady's tale?" "It seems impossible on the face of it," I replied. "A diamond vanishing from a locked case under direct observation defies all natural law." Precisely, my dear fellow. And when we encounter the impossible, we must look not to supernatural explanations, but to the very human capacity for deception and misdirection. Someone has gone to considerable trouble to create the illusion of an impossible crime, and I confess myself most curious to discover both the method and the motive behind such an elaborate charade. The fog pressed against our windows like a living thing, and as Holmes began his preparations for our afternoon visit to the Blackwood residence, I could not shake the feeling that we were about to embark upon one of those cases that would test even his remarkable powers of deduction to their utmost limits. The journey through London's fog-shrouded streets proved as treacherous as it was atmospheric, our hansom cab navigating the grey labyrinth with the cautious pace of a ship in uncharted waters. Holmes maintained his characteristic silence, though I observed him studying the passing gas lamps with that peculiar intensity that marked the beginning of his investigative process. The fog seemed to press against our windows like a living thing, transforming the familiar thoroughfares of Mayfair into an alien landscape where shadows held dominion over substance. The Blackwood residence emerged from the mist like a fortress of red brick and Portland stone, its imposing facade made even more forbidding by the persistent gloom that clung to its ornate cornices. A liveried footman admitted us into a spacious hall where the gleam of polished mahogany and the hush of expensive carpet spoke of generations of wealth and influence. Yet there was an unmistakable tension in the air, a quality of unease that no amount of aristocratic refinement could entirely dispel. We were conducted to a magnificent library where Lord Blackwood awaited us, a man of perhaps 50 years with the bearing of one accustomed to command and the weathered complexion that spoke of long service in the tropical climates of the Empire. He rose from behind an imposing mahogany desk, his movements betraying an underlying strain despite his outwardly composed demeanour. Before the usual pleasantries could be exchanged, Holmes paused near the fireplace, his keen gaze fixed upon some detail that escaped my observation. "Lord Blackwood," said he, his voice conversational, yet penetrating, "I trust your morning negotiations regarding the Burma mining concessions proved satisfactory, despite the disagreeable necessity of conducting business through such persistent correspondence." Our host's eyebrows rose in evident surprise. "Remarkable, Mr. Holmes, indeed. I have spent the better part of the morning in correspondence with the Colonial Office regarding certain mining rights. But how could you possibly deduce such specific details?" Holmes gestured toward the desk with that slight smile I had learned to recognize. "The faint scent of sealing wax still clings to your sleeve, suggesting recent use of official correspondence. The slight indentation upon your right index finger indicates extensive writing, while the particular quality of the ink, stain upon your cuff, suggests the blue-black variety favoured by government offices. The rest follows naturally from your known opposition to certain commercial interests in Burma." Lord Blackwood regarded Holmes with newfound respect, the scepticism in his eyes replaced by genuine admiration. "Lady Blackwood assured me of your unique talents, but I confess I was unprepared for such precision. Please be seated. I am most eager to have you examine the scene of this impossible crime." As we settled into leather chairs before the fireplace, Lord Blackwood recounted the events of 3 nights prior with military precision, his voice controlled yet punctuated by moments of genuine bewilderment. He described his evening routine, the unlocking of the case, the examination of the diamond under his reading lamp, and the inexplicable vanishing that had occurred within the space of 30 seconds. "The study has remained sealed since Inspector Lestrade completed his investigation," Lord Blackwood continued. "I should very much like you to examine both the room and the display case, for I confess myself utterly baffled by the circumstances." Holmes rose with that fluid grace which marked his movements when the scent of a mystery was strong upon the air. "Lead on, Lord Blackwood. I find that impossible crimes often yield their secrets to methodical observation." The study proved to be a smaller but no less impressive chamber, lined with cabinets containing what was clearly one of the finest private collections of Oriental artifacts in London. The display case stood upon its black marble pedestal in the centre of the room, its crystal surfaces catching and reflecting the gaslight in a manner that created an almost hypnotic effect. Holmes approached the case with the reverent care of a scientist examining a rare specimen, his magnifying glass appearing in his long fingers. For several minutes he studied the lock, the crystal panels, and the marble base with minute attention, occasionally emitting those small sounds of interest that I had learned to recognize as signs of discovery. "Most ingenious," he murmured, running his finger along the base of the marble pedestal. "Lord Blackwood, who had access to this room during the installation of your display case?" "Only myself, the craftsman from Brahma who fitted the lock, and my cousin Arthur Penrith, who supervised the arrangement of the lighting and the positioning of the pedestal itself." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that predatory light that marked a significant development. "And where might we find Mr. Penrith at present?" "He maintains chambers at the Albany," Lord Blackwood replied, though I detected a note of reluctance in his voice. "Surely you cannot suspect Arthur of involvement in this affair?" "I suspect nothing and everything," Holmes replied, straightening from his examination. "However, I have observed certain irregularities in the construction of this pedestal that warrant immediate investigation." The irregularities to which Holmes referred became apparent as he knelt beside the black marble pedestal, his long fingers tracing what appeared to be seamless stone with the precision of a surgeon examining a patient. His magnifying glass caught the gaslight as he studied the junction where marble met the polished floorboards, and I observed that familiar intensity that marked the beginning of one of his most methodical examinations. "Watson," he said without looking up, "observe the base of this pedestal. The craftsmanship is indeed exemplary, yet certain details suggest recent disturbance." He indicated an almost imperceptible hairline crack running along the inner edge, where the marble met the parquet flooring. "This fissure is too straight, too deliberate to be natural, and here," he pointed to faint marks on the surrounding wood, "abrasion marks that speak of precise manipulation." Lord Blackwood leaned forward, his scepticism evident. "I see nothing but minor imperfections, Mr. Holmes. The pedestal has remained undisturbed since its installation." Holmes produced a small metal instrument from his waistcoat and inserted it into what I now realized was indeed a concealed seam. "The dust in these particular crevices is lighter than elsewhere in the room, indicating recent exposure to air. And observe this minute chip in the marble. Its edges remain sharp and untarnished, with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet study. A section of the marble base swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a hollow cavity within the pedestal itself. The revelation struck Lord Blackwood like a physical blow. He stepped backward, his face draining of colour as the implications became clear. "Good heavens, I had no knowledge of any such mechanism. The pedestal was delivered complete from the stonemason's workshop." Holmes withdrew his head from the cavity, his expression thoughtful yet troubled. "The compartment is empty now, but the velvet lining bears the distinct impression of an object approximately the size and shape of your missing diamond. Most ingenious, yet requiring intimate knowledge of both the stone's dimensions and your daily habits." I found myself studying the mechanism with fascination and growing unease. Someone had constructed an elaborate device for theft, hidden within what appeared to be solid marble, operated by a concealed mechanism that could be triggered remotely or through careful timing. Your cousin, Arthur Penrith, supervised the installation you mentioned? Holmes inquired, his tone carefully neutral as he closed the hidden compartment. Arthur has always possessed remarkable facility with mechanical devices, Lord Blackwood replied, though his voice carried a note of reluctant admission. During our service in India, he designed several ingenious improvements to our field equipment. Upon returning to England, he has occupied himself with various inventions, though more as a gentleman's pursuit than commercial endeavour. Holmes nodded, though I detected scepticism in his manner. He moved to examine the crystal display case itself, running his fingers along the edges with delicate precision. The lock remains uncompromised, the crystal unmarked. Yet here, he breathed gently upon one panel, producing a ghostly bloom of condensation, the faintest trace of pressure from a circular instrument, India rubber perhaps applied to create suction. The picture that emerged grew increasingly damning. A man with mechanical expertise, opportunity during installation, and intimate knowledge of the study's layout presented a compelling suspect. Yet something in Holmes's expression suggested he was not entirely satisfied with so obvious a solution. "We must speak with Mr. Penrith immediately," Holmes declared, straightening from his examination. "However, I would suggest we approach him with considerable discretion. If he is indeed involved, premature revelation of our suspicions could prove disastrous." Lord Blackwood's composure finally cracked, the weight of potential betrayal evident in his trembling hands. "If Arthur has deceived me in such a manner, the wound to our family honour will be considerable. Yet I cannot ignore the evidence before us." As we prepared to depart, Holmes paused at the study door, his keen gaze sweeping the room one final time. "Lord Blackwood, maintain absolute discretion regarding our discovery. Should Mr. Penrith prove to be our culprit, any premature warning could result in the permanent loss of your diamond." The fog had thickened during our examination, transforming the afternoon into premature twilight. As our hansom cab moved through the grey streets toward the Albany, Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his fingers steepled before his face. "Holmes," I ventured, "surely the evidence points quite clearly toward Penrith's involvement." "Indeed, Watson, the case appears substantial. Yet I confess myself troubled by the very obviousness of it all. In my experience, truly clever criminals seldom leave such a clear trail pointing directly toward themselves." His words carried an ominous undertone that suggested our investigation was far from concluded. The Albany's stately Georgian facade emerged from the fog like a bastion of genteel respectability, its classical proportions and understated elegance speaking of an era when a gentleman's reputation mattered more than his commercial success. As we ascended the marble steps, Holmes maintained that thoughtful silence which invariably preceded his most penetrating interviews, though I detected in his manner a subtle shift from the predatory intensity he had displayed at the Blackwood residence to something more akin to scientific curiosity. Arthur Penrith received us in chambers that immediately revealed the character of their occupant. The sitting room combined the comfortable appointments expected of a gentleman's residence with the unmistakable evidence of a mind devoted to mechanical pursuits. Precision instruments lay arranged with military orderliness upon a mahogany table, while bookshelves groaned under volumes on engineering and natural philosophy. The man himself proved to be of middle height and scholarly bearing, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the pale complexion of one who spent considerable time in indoor pursuits. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, rising with evident pleasure, "an unexpected honour, though I confess concern at what brings you to my door. I trust my cousin Charles is well?" Holmes accepted the offered chair with characteristic grace, his keen gaze already cataloguing the contents of the room with that systematic thoroughness I had learned to recognize. Lord Blackwood enjoys excellent health, though he finds himself confronted with a mystery that has proven quite beyond the capabilities of Scotland Yard. Perhaps you have heard of the disappearance of his prized diamond. A shadow crossed Penrith's features, though whether from genuine concern or carefully concealed guilt remained unclear to my observation. Indeed, Charles mentioned the matter in his correspondence, a most extraordinary affair from what little I understand. The stone simply vanished under circumstances that appear to defy rational explanation. "Quite so," Holmes replied, his tone conversational, yet penetrating. "I understand you supervised the installation of the display apparatus and its positioning within the study, a considerable responsibility given the extraordinary value of the collection." Penrith moved to pour brandy from a crystal decanter, his hands appearing perfectly steady despite the gravity of our inquiry. Charles desired the lighting to be arranged with particular precision to showcase the diamond's unique optical properties. The black shadow possesses remarkable characteristics that require careful illumination to fully appreciate. Holmes rose and drifted toward the mechanical apparatus upon the table, his interest apparently casual, yet unmistakably focused. Among the various instruments, I observed what appeared to be a small pneumatic device and several precision tools that spoke of considerable expertise in mechanical construction. "Your work continues to involve engineering principles, I observe," Holmes remarked, examining a brass mechanism with evident appreciation. "This device appears to incorporate controlled air pressure for mechanical advantage." "A small project of my own design," Penrith replied, though I detected a note of caution in his voice. "An improved mechanism for various household applications. The principles are quite straightforward, though the execution requires considerable precision." Holmes nodded thoughtfully, then fixed our host with that penetrating stare that seemed to look directly into a man's soul. "Mr. Penrith, during your supervision of the pedestal's installation, did you observe any irregularities in its construction, any evidence of concealed mechanisms or unusual features?" The question struck Penrith like a physical blow, his composure faltering as the full import of Holmes's inquiry became clear. For several moments he remained silent, his eyes darting between Holmes and myself as if calculating the wisdom of various responses. "I must confess, Mr. Holmes," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "that I did notice certain peculiarities in the marble work. The pedestal appeared to have been constructed with unusual complexity, though I assumed this to be merely an example of the stonemason's artistic ambition." "The stonemason's name, if you please," Holmes requested, his tone suggesting considerable importance attached to the answer. "Jonas Farley of Brahma and Company fitted the lock mechanism," Penrith replied with apparent relief at shifting attention elsewhere. "As for the pedestal itself, it was supplied by Mortimer Blackstone, whose workshop in Whitechapel enjoys considerable reputation among collectors requiring specialized work." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me before returning his attention to Penrith. "You were present on the evening of the theft?" "I attended a lecture at the Royal Institution that evening," Penrith responded promptly. "Professor Ramsay's presentation on selenium cells and their sensitivity to light. I remained afterward for refreshments and did not return here until nearly midnight." As we prepared to take our leave, Holmes paused at the door with that characteristic gesture that marked a significant observation. "Mr. Penrith, you have been most helpful. However, I must caution you that this investigation is far from concluded." The fog had thickened during our interview, and as our hansom moved through the grey streets, Holmes sat in contemplative silence. "Watson," he said at length, "What is your assessment of Mr. Penrith's involvement?" "The evidence seems quite compelling," I replied. "His mechanical expertise, opportunity during installation, and knowledge of the pedestal's construction all point toward his guilt." Holmes's response carried an ominous undertone that suggested our investigation had only begun to reveal its true complexity. "Indeed, Watson, the case against him appears almost too perfectly constructed. In my experience, when evidence points so obviously toward a single suspect, one must consider whether that very obviousness might itself be part of an elaborate deception." The journey through London's fog-shrouded streets to Whitechapel proved a stark transition from the refined squares of Mayfair to the narrow, industrious thoroughfares where honest craftsmen pursued their trades amid the perpetual din of commerce. Holmes maintained his contemplative silence during our passage, though I observed him studying the passing streetscape with that peculiar intensity that suggested his mind was engaged in connecting seemingly disparate elements into a coherent pattern. The fog seemed to thicken with each mile eastward, transforming familiar landmarks into ghostly suggestions of their former selves. Mortimer Blackstone's workshop occupied a corner building whose soot-stained brick facade bore testimony to decades of exposure to London's industrial atmosphere, yet the brass nameplate beside the heavy oak door gleamed with the pride of a master craftsman who valued reputation above all else. The interior immediately impressed with its atmosphere of skilled craftsmanship and meticulous organization, where marble slabs in various stages of completion occupied wooden trestles throughout the spacious workshop, and the walls displayed examples of the finest decorative stonework I had ever encountered. The proprietor himself proved to be a man of perhaps 60 years, his powerful frame and calloused hands speaking of a lifetime devoted to working stone, yet his intelligent eyes and cultured speech revealed education that extended well beyond his trade. He greeted us with evident curiosity, wiping marble dust from his hands with a well-worn cloth as Holmes explained the nature of our inquiry. "The Blackwood Commission," Blackstone nodded thoughtfully when Holmes mentioned the pedestal. "A most unusual request, though the specifications were provided with remarkable detail and precision. However, I must tell you, gentlemen, something that may surprise you. The commission was not arranged by Lord Blackwood himself." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that predatory light that marked a significant development. "Indeed? Pray continue, Mr. Blackstone." "A gentleman acting as intermediary handled all arrangements," the craftsman explained, moving to a cabinet and withdrawing a leather portfolio containing detailed drawings. He identified himself as M. Gray and claimed to represent Lord Blackwood's interests, paid in gold sovereigns, and insisted upon absolute discretion regarding the work. Holmes examined the technical drawings with intense concentration, his magnifying glass revealing details that escaped casual observation. The specifications showed a standard marble pedestal of elegant proportions, with no indication of concealed mechanisms or hidden compartments. "These drawings show no provision for internal cavities," Holmes observed, his tone carefully neutral. "Yet we discovered a sophisticated hidden compartment within the completed pedestal." Blackstone's weathered features registered genuine surprise and concern. "Impossible, Mr. Holmes. I supervised every cut, every polish myself. The pedestal left my workshop exactly as specified in those drawings. Solid Belgian black marble, precisely crafted, but with no internal modifications whatsoever." The implications struck me immediately, though Holmes appeared to have anticipated this revelation. If Blackstone spoke truthfully, then someone had modified the pedestal after its completion, requiring considerable skill and access to the piece during its installation or shortly thereafter. "This intermediary, Mr. Gray," Holmes continued, "can you describe him in detail?" "A gentleman of perhaps 40 years, well-dressed, but with the bearing of one accustomed to manual work. He possessed considerable knowledge of mechanical principles and spoke with authority regarding precise tolerances and structural requirements. There was something about his manner that suggested military training, perhaps engineering corps. Holmes withdrew the ransom note from his pocket and showed it to the craftsman. "Have you encountered this handwriting before?" Blackstone studied the paper with careful attention, his brow furrowing in concentration. "The script bears similarities to the technical notations that accompanied the original specifications, though I cannot be entirely certain. The hand appears educated, controlled, yet with that slight tremor you mentioned." As we prepared to depart, Holmes paused to examine several completed pieces displayed throughout the workshop. His attention was caught by a collection of small ornamental objects, and he lifted a delicately carved marble paperweight, turning it over in his long fingers. "Your work demonstrates exceptional skill, Mr. Blackstone," Holmes remarked. "I trust your services are much in demand among collectors of fine objects." The craftsman's response carried troubling implications that transformed our understanding of the case entirely. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes, and most peculiarly, I have received several similar commissions within recent months. Each involved wealthy collectors, each required absolute discretion, and each was arranged through intermediaries who provided remarkably detailed specifications." Holmes set down the paperweight with deliberate care, his voice carrying that dangerous quietness that marked his most significant discoveries. "The names of these collectors, if you please." "Sir Reginald Ashworth of Belgravia, Mr. Harrison Pembroke of Kensington, and Lord Blackwood himself." Each commission involved display apparatus for valuable collections, though in retrospect I begin to wonder about the true nature of these requests. The revelation struck like a thunderbolt, transforming our investigation from a simple case of theft by a trusted relative into something far more sinister and systematic. Holmes thanked Blackstone for his cooperation, and we departed into the fog-shrouded streets with the full implications of what we had learned beginning to assume their proper significance. "Watson," Holmes said as our hansom moved through the grey afternoon, "we are dealing not with an isolated theft, but with a systematic campaign directed against collectors of valuable objects. The precision of these operations suggests an organization of considerable sophistication and resources, one that has been operating under our very noses for months." The fog seemed to press against our cab windows with renewed intensity, as if the very atmosphere of London sought to conceal the dark conspiracy we had begun to uncover. I found myself wondering how many other collectors had fallen victim to this elaborate scheme, and what role Arthur Penrith truly played in these machinations. The pedestal was modified after leaving Blackstone's workshop, Holmes continued, his voice carrying that tone of absolute certainty that marked his completed deductions. Someone with considerable mechanical expertise gained access during installation and created the hidden compartment. Penrith's detailed questions about weight distribution and structural integrity now assume an entirely different significance. He was either the perpetrator ensuring his modifications would remain undetected, or an innocent man whose technical curiosity provided cover for the real criminal's activities. As our hansom carried us back toward the heart of London, I realized that we had uncovered not merely a theft, but the edges of a criminal enterprise that threatened the very foundations of trust upon which civilized society depended. The game, as Holmes would say, was indeed afoot, and the stakes had risen far beyond the recovery of a single diamond, however valuable it might be. The implications of Blackstone's revelations demanded immediate verification, and Holmes directed our hansom toward Belgravia with that purposeful energy that marked the beginning of his most systematic investigations. The fog had thickened during our interview, transforming the familiar thoroughfares into a grey labyrinth where gas lamps appeared as mere suggestions of light, struggling against the oppressive gloom that seemed to mirror the darkening conspiracy we had begun to uncover. Sir Reginald Ashworth's townhouse emerged from the mist like a fortress of cream-coloured stone, its elegant Georgian proportions speaking of generations of wealth and refinement. The elderly baronet who received us in his drawing-room bore the unmistakable marks of recent distress, his military bearing unable to entirely conceal the tremor in his hands as he recounted circumstances that proved disturbingly familiar. 3 months ago, Mr. Holmes, Sir Reginald explained, his voice carrying the controlled precision of a man accustomed to command, I received correspondence from a gentleman representing himself as Monsieur Gray, offering specialized display services for valuable collections. The proposal seemed providential, as I had been considering improved security for my Oriental artifacts. Holmes leaned forward with that intensity that marked his most crucial interviews. The work was completed to your satisfaction? Indeed, though certain irregularities troubled me at the time, Mr. Gray insisted upon working during evening hours when the household was at rest, claiming this would minimize disruption. His nocturnal activities struck me as somewhat unusual for legitimate craft work. As Holmes examined the display case that housed Sir Reginald's collection, I observed him employing the same methodical approach that had revealed the hidden mechanism at the Blackwood residence. Within moments, his practiced fingers had located the concealed seam in what appeared to be solid marble, revealing another sophisticated compartment identical in construction to the first. "Your most prized piece?" Holmes inquired, straightening from his examination. "I trust it remains secure?" Sir Reginald's composure finally cracked, the weight of his loss evident in his trembling voice. "The Eye of Shiva, a star sapphire of extraordinary properties, vanished 6 weeks ago under circumstances that defied all rational explanation. The stone simply disappeared from its locked case while I stepped away for mere moments to pour brandy." The pattern emerging before us grew increasingly sinister with each revelation. Holmes withdrew his magnifying glass and examined the ransom note Sir Reginald produced, its expensive paper, distinctive handwriting, and precise demands matching those received by Lady Blackwood with unsettling accuracy. "The dinner party you hosted that evening?" Holmes continued, his tone suggesting considerable importance attached to the answer. Might the guest list have included Lord Blackwood or other prominent collectors? Indeed, both Lord Blackwood and Harrison Pembroke were present, along with several other collectors of Oriental artifacts. We had gathered to examine a remarkable manuscript recently acquired by Pembroke, depicting various techniques of jade carving from the Ming period. As we departed Sir Reginald's residence, the fog seemed to press against us with renewed intensity, as if the very atmosphere of London sought to conceal the dark conspiracy we had uncovered. Holmes maintained his characteristic silence during our return journey, though I observed him studying the evidence we had gathered with that peculiar concentration that preceded his most significant deductions. Upon reaching Baker Street, Holmes immediately withdrew to his chemical corner, producing several small samples he had secured from both crime scenes. His test tubes and spirit lamp were soon at work, filling our sitting room with the acrid scents of his analytical processes. "Watson," he said at length, holding a glass slide to the lamp, "observe the consistency of these residues, marine glue of a particular composition, lamp black mixed with fish oil to deaden reflections, and traces of a specialized lubricant used in precision mechanical work. Our criminal possesses considerable technical expertise and access to materials not commonly available." He set aside his apparatus and fixed me with that penetrating gaze that marked his completed analysis. "We are dealing with an organization of remarkable sophistication, one that has been operating systematically against London's most prominent collectors for months. The precision of their methods, the consistency of their approach, and the careful selection of victims all point to extensive planning and inside knowledge of the collector community." The evening shadows were lengthening as Holmes began his preparations for what I sensed would be a crucial phase of our investigation. He withdrew his disguise materials from their accustomed drawer, transforming his appearance with swift, economical strokes until the keen planes of his face blurred into the unremarkable features of a down-at-heel clerk. "Tomorrow brings the midnight rendezvous beneath Nelson's column," he said, adjusting his shabby coat with professional precision. "Yet tonight I shall conduct a preliminary reconnaissance of Trafalgar Square, for one must learn its shadows before one can steal its light." As Holmes vanished into the fog-shrouded streets, I found myself contemplating the true scope of the conspiracy we had uncovered, wondering how many other collectors had fallen victim to these elaborate deceptions and what ultimate purpose drove such systematic theft. Holmes returned shortly after dawn with that particular satisfaction that marked successful reconnaissance, his shabby disguise having served its purpose in the fog-shrouded precincts of Trafalgar Square. As he resumed his natural appearance, I observed traces of soot upon his sleeve and that familiar gleam in his eyes that suggested significant discoveries had been made during his nocturnal observations. "Watson," he said, settling into his chair with evident pleasure, "our adversary has chosen his rendezvous point with considerable cunning. However, I have identified several irregularities that may prove advantageous to our cause." He withdrew a small envelope from his waistcoat and tapped its contents onto the table. "Marine glue of the same composition we discovered at the crime scenes, fresh chalk marks indicating recent activity and traces of that specialized lubricant. Our criminal maintains a workshop nearby, or at minimum conducts final preparations in the vicinity." Before I could press him for further details, Mrs. Hudson's gentle knock announced an unexpected visitor whose agitated demeanor immediately suggested another development in our increasingly complex case. Harrison Pembroke proved to be a man of scholarly bearing, his nervous energy and pale complexion betraying the strain of recent events as he recounted circumstances that confirmed our worst fears about the systematic nature of the conspiracy. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice carrying the controlled precision of one struggling to maintain composure, "I fear I have fallen victim to the same criminal enterprise that has plagued Lord Blackwood and Sir Reginald Ashworth. The Dragon's Breath, a jade figurine of extraordinary antiquity, vanished from its display case yesterday evening under conditions identical to the previous thefts." Holmes leaned forward with that predatory intensity that marked his most crucial interviews. "The circumstances were precisely similar?" "Indeed, though there is something else that may prove significant. Yesterday afternoon, before the theft occurred, I received an unexpected visitor. Arthur Penrith called upon me, claiming interest in examining my collection for a scholarly article he was preparing on Oriental artifacts. The revelation struck like a thunderbolt, transforming our assessment of Penrith's role in these machinations." Holmes's eyes glittered with that dangerous light that marked a breakthrough in his reasoning. Yet I detected something troubling in his expression that suggested the solution was not as straightforward as it appeared. "Mr. Penrith examined your collection thoroughly?" Holmes inquired, his tone carefully neutral. "Indeed, he spent considerable time studying the display arrangements and asking detailed questions about the security measures. He seemed particularly interested in the precise positioning of the jade figurine and the timing mechanisms of the locks. As Pembroke recounted the familiar pattern of the mysterious M. Gray's installation work and the subsequent ransom demand, Holmes began that restless pacing which invariably accompanied his most intensive periods of deduction. The evidence against Penrith appeared overwhelming, yet something in Holmes's manner suggested he remained troubled by aspects that did not align with this apparently obvious conclusion. "The ransom amounts trouble me, Watson," Holmes said after Pembroke had departed with strict instructions regarding discretion. £1,000 for treasures worth 10 times that sum suggests either remarkable restraint or an entirely different motive. These crimes require extensive planning, specialized equipment, and considerable risk. The financial reward hardly justifies such elaborate preparation. He withdrew the various ransom notes and spread them upon the table, studying them with methodical thoroughness. Moreover, Penrith's visit to Pembroke strikes me as remarkably careless for a criminal who has otherwise demonstrated exceptional cunning. Would a mastermind of such sophistication expose himself so obviously on the very day of a planned theft? The afternoon shadows were lengthening as Holmes began his final preparations for the midnight rendezvous. He checked his revolver with professional precision and dispatched urgent telegrams to Inspector Lestrade, arranging for plainclothes officers to be positioned at strategic points around Trafalgar Square. "Tonight, Watson, we shall discover whether Arthur Penrith is indeed our quarry, or whether he too has been manipulated by a more cunning adversary. The fog that has shrouded London these past days may prove the perfect cover for unmasking a criminal whose audacity exceeds even my considerable experience." As the clock struck 9, Holmes donned his greatcoat with that methodical precision that marked the beginning of his most dangerous enterprises, and I found myself wondering whether we were about to apprehend a clever thief or walk into a trap set by an even more formidable mastermind. The fog had reached an almost supernatural density by 11 o'clock, transforming Trafalgar Square into a grey void where Nelson's column rose like a phantom masked from a sea of swirling mist. Holmes and I took our positions with the methodical precision that marked his most crucial operations, the weighted brass discs in the ransom bag replaced by his design, each marked with minute nicks and connected by silk thread, so fine it vanished against the wet cobblestones. "On no account move until I signal," Holmes breathed, positioning himself behind the Western Lion with that fluid grace which marked his movements during critical phases. "Our adversary has proven too clever to be taken by conventional means." Lestrade's men occupied strategic positions around the square, their forms barely visible in the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to swallow both sound and sight. As the distant chimes of Big Ben struck the first note of midnight, not one but two figures emerged from the fog near different approaches to the square. The first, moving with nervous energy from the direction of Pall Mall, proved to be Arthur Penrith himself, his scholarly bearing unmistakable even in the obscuring mist. Yet my attention was immediately drawn to a second shadow that detached itself from the deeper gloom near the National Gallery, moving with predatory grace toward the unsuspecting Penrith. Holmes's hand tightened on my arm as we watched the scene unfold with terrible clarity. Penrith approached the column's base and knelt to place what appeared to be the ransom payment, his movements betraying the strain of a man acting under extreme duress. Before he could straighten, the second figure struck with brutal efficiency, rendering Penrith unconscious with a swift blow that spoke of professional training. The attacker moved with calculated precision, stripping Penrith of his outer coat and hat before donning them himself, then retrieving the ransom bag and melting back into the fog-shrouded streets. The entire encounter lasted no more than 30 seconds, yet it revealed the true nature of the conspiracy we had been investigating. Holmes was in motion immediately, his long form cutting through the mist with remarkable swiftness as he pursued the fleeing figure. I followed as best I could, my service revolver drawn, while Lestrade's men converged on Penrith's unconscious form. The chase led through a maze of narrow alleys where our quarry demonstrated intimate knowledge of London's hidden passages, twice eluding capture through routes that spoke of careful preparation. At the mouth of a mews leading toward the Thames, Holmes halted, not in defeat, but with that peculiar satisfaction that marked a successful gathering of evidence. He knelt where the fugitive had brushed against damp brick, collecting samples of lamp-black mixed with fine grit upon his fingertips. "Abrasive compound for polishing crystal, Watson," he observed with evident satisfaction. "Our criminal maintains a workshop nearby, and his recent activities have left unmistakable traces." He indicated a jimmied door that revealed a small room stripped of most furnishings yet bearing crucial evidence of recent occupation. The walls displayed chalk diagrams of Trafalgar Square with precise measurements and sightlines marked in a hand I recognized from the ransom notes. Upon a workbench lay precision tools, still warm from recent use, along with samples of the specialized marine glue and lubricants we had discovered at the crime scenes. Most significantly, a stationer's card from Wigmore and Sons bore the name M. Grayson in the same distinctive handwriting, with Charing Cross, poste restante, noted below. Lestrade arrived with news that confirmed our new understanding of the case. "Penrith's been drugged, Mr. Holmes, but he's coming round. Claims he received a note this morning demanding he deliver ransom for his cousin's diamond, threatening harm to Lady Blackwood if he refused. The poor devil thought he was saving his family." Holmes examined the unconscious man's pockets, discovering they had been thoroughly searched and his own wallet removed. "Our criminal is thorough, Lestrade. He's sought to ensure that Penrith would be found here with evidence of guilt, while the true mastermind vanished with both the ransom and his victim's personal effects." As we helped the groggy Penrith to his feet, Holmes's expression carried that dangerous intensity that marked his most significant deductions. This entire elaborate scheme was designed to implicate an innocent man while concealing the true scope of a systematic campaign against London's collectors. The precision of tonight's operation, the intimate knowledge of our investigation, and the careful manipulation of evidence all point to a criminal of extraordinary sophistication. He withdrew his magnifying glass and examined a fragment of dark material he had collected from the cobblestones near where Penrith had fallen. "Obsidian, Watson, polished to mirror brightness and shaped with remarkable precision. This is not merely a tool but a craftsman's signature, suggesting our adversary is himself a collector whose obsession with rarity extends to the instruments of his crimes." The fog began to thin as dawn approached, revealing the full scope of the deception that had been practiced upon us. Holmes stood in contemplative silence, studying the evidence we had gathered with that methodical thoroughness that preceded his most brilliant deductions. "Monsieur Grayson, poste restante at Charing Cross," he murmured, his voice carrying that tone of absolute certainty that marked completed reasoning. "Tomorrow, Watson, we shall discover the true identity of our shadow thief, and I suspect we shall find that his connection to the collector community runs deeper than mere criminal enterprise. The game, as I have often observed, is indeed afoot, and our adversary has just made the crucial error that will lead to his downfall." As we departed Trafalgar Square with Penrith supported between us and Lestrade's men, securing the evidence from the abandoned workshop, I realized that we had uncovered not merely a theft ring, but a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of trust within London's most refined social circles. The true test of Holmes's deductive powers lay ahead as we prepared to unmask a criminal whose audacity and sophistication exceeded even our considerable experience. The morning brought a clarity to both London's fog-shrouded streets and to the intricate puzzle that had consumed our attention, though the mist still clung to the city with that peculiar persistence that seemed to mirror the elusive nature of our quarry. Holmes emerged from his chemical corner with that particular satisfaction that marked the successful completion of his analytical processes, the obsidian fragment and various residue samples arranged with methodical precision upon his workbench. "Watson," he announced, holding the polished black glass to the pale sunlight filtering through our windows, "this fragment has yielded secrets that transform our entire understanding of the case. This is not merely volcanic glass, but a precision optical component ground to tolerances that speak of exceptional craftsmanship. Observe the minute tool marks along its edge. They indicate cutting with diamond dust wheels and polishing techniques employed only by the finest instrument makers. I leaned forward to examine the fragment more closely, noting the almost mirror-like quality of its surface and the way it seemed to absorb, rather than reflect, the morning light. Its properties are remarkable, I observed. The way it interacts with illumination reminds me of Lady Blackwood's description of the stolen diamond itself. "Precisely, my dear fellow," Holmes replied with evident satisfaction. "The Kala Chaya's ability to cast shadows within itself has inspired not mere theft, but the creation of an elaborate optical apparatus designed to manipulate light and shadow with unprecedented precision. Our criminal is not simply a thief, but a master of illusion whose expertise rivals that of any stage magician or scientific instrument maker in London." Before I could press him for further details, Holmes was already donning his coat with that purposeful energy that marked the beginning of his most crucial investigations. "The postal address from Charing Cross demands immediate attention, Watson. If our adversary maintains regular correspondence under the name Grayson, we may yet intercept him before he realizes the extent of our discoveries." The journey to Charing Cross revealed a London slowly emerging from its fog-bound imprisonment, though wisps of grey mist still clung to the buildings like ghostly fingers reluctant to release their hold. Holmes had already secured the cooperation of the postal supervisor through a combination of Lestrade's authority and his own considerable powers of persuasion, positioning himself with clear sight lines to the poste restante counter, while maintaining the unremarkable appearance of a clerk, awaiting his own correspondence. It was shortly before 11 o'clock when our patience was rewarded by the appearance of a wiry man of middle height, whose iron-grey moustache and engineer's bearing immediately commanded attention. He approached the counter with that controlled urgency that spoke of long-established routine, requesting letters for Monsieur Grayson and signing the receipt with a small, careful hand, whose slight tremor I recognized immediately from the ransom notes. Holmes's posture altered almost imperceptibly as we followed our quarry through the crowded streets, maintaining that judicious distance which allowed observation without detection. The man's route led through a maze of narrow passages that spoke of intimate knowledge of London's hidden thoroughfares, pausing briefly at a stationer's shop, where he collected a small wrapped package before continuing toward what appeared to be a modest commercial district near the Strand. Our surveillance was brought to an abrupt and shocking conclusion when we discovered our quarry collapsed in a narrow alley, his body positioned as if overcome by sudden illness, yet bearing unmistakable signs of foul play. Holmes knelt beside the unconscious form with that methodical precision which marked his examination of crime scenes, his long fingers exploring the man's collar and discovering what appeared to be a minute puncture wound behind the left ear. "Professional work, Watson," he murmured, his voice carrying that dangerous quietness that marked his most significant discoveries. "A single precise insertion, delivered with surgical accuracy and withdrawn in the same motion. Our adversary eliminates his accomplices with the same methodical efficiency he employs in his thefts." Lestrade's arrival with 2 constables allowed for a thorough search of the victim's effects, revealing a card case bearing the name Jonas Farley, mechanic, Brummer and Company. The revelation struck me with the force of recognition. This was the very locksmith who had fitted the security mechanisms for Lord Blackwood's display case, the man whose expertise had been essential to the creation of the elaborate theft apparatus. Farley possessed intimate knowledge of every lock mechanism, every security measure employed by our victims, Holmes observed, as we examined the contents of the man's pockets. His elimination suggests that his usefulness had reached its end, or perhaps that he had begun to pose a threat to his employer's continued operations. The search of Farley's modest lodgings in Drury Lane revealed the full scope of his involvement in the conspiracy. His workbench bore traces of the specialized marine glue and lubricants we had discovered at the crime scenes, while a carefully maintained ledger recorded payments received from an employer identified only as MG. The entries corresponded precisely with the dates of the various thefts, each marked as complete upon successful execution. Most significantly, we discovered detailed technical drawings that revealed the true ingenuity of the theft mechanism. The pedestals had indeed been modified after delivery, fitted with pneumatic chambers operated by precisely timed mechanisms that could create controlled suction sufficient to remove objects through the crystal display cases without leaving visible traces of entry. "Observe these calculations, Watson," Holmes said, indicating a series of mathematical notations in Farley's careful hand, air pressure differentials, timing sequences, and most remarkably, optical formulae dealing with light refraction and absorption. Farley was not merely a mechanic, but a craftsman capable of creating apparatus that borders on the supernatural in its sophistication. Among Farley's effects, we also discovered a British Museum reading room ticket bearing the name Grayson, along with detailed notes on various treatises dealing with crystallography, optical physics, and the mechanical principles governing precision instruments. The picture that emerged spoke of systematic research conducted over months, possibly years, in preparation for these elaborate crimes. "The obsidian fragment begins to assume its proper significance," Holmes continued, examining the museum ticket with his magnifying glass. "Our criminal has been conducting extensive research into the optical properties of rare crystals, developing techniques for manipulating light itself. The stolen diamonds were not chosen for their monetary value alone, but for their unique crystalline structures that interact with illumination in ways that conventional science barely comprehends." As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Holmes began his preparations for what I sensed would be the crucial phase of our investigation. He studied the evidence we had gathered with that methodical thoroughness that preceded his most brilliant deductions, his keen mind already racing ahead to anticipate our adversary's next move. "The reading room provides our next avenue of investigation, Watson," he said, donning his scholar's disguise with practiced efficiency. "A man who conducts such extensive research leaves traces that the trained eye can detect. Tonight, we shall discover not merely the method behind these impossible crimes, but the identity of the mastermind who has orchestrated this elaborate campaign against London's most prominent collectors." The fog had begun to lift as we departed for the British Museum, revealing a city that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the revelations that lay ahead. I found myself wondering what manner of criminal genius we were about to confront, and whether even Holmes's remarkable powers would prove sufficient to unravel a conspiracy whose sophistication exceeded anything in our considerable experience. "The game approaches its climax, Watson," Holmes observed as our hansom moved through the clearing streets. "Our adversary has demonstrated exceptional cunning, but the elimination of Farley suggests desperation. When criminals begin silencing their accomplices, they invariably make the crucial errors that lead to their downfall." As we approached the imposing facade of the British Museum, I realized that we stood on the threshold of discoveries that would either crown Holmes's career with one of his greatest triumphs or challenge his deductive powers in ways that neither of us could yet fully comprehend. The shadows that had concealed our quarry for so long were about to yield their secrets, and the true scope of this remarkable conspiracy would finally be revealed. The reading room of the British Museum presented that atmosphere of scholarly quietude which had witnessed countless hours of research and discovery, its great circular dome rising above long rows of desks where learned men bent over their volumes with that peculiar absorption which transforms mere mortals into vessels of accumulated knowledge. Holmes, in his scholar's disguise, complete with wire-rimmed spectacles and the slightly stooped bearing of one accustomed to close work among dusty tomes, approached the inquiry desk with the quiet authority of an established researcher. The head librarian, a precise gentleman whose methodical manner spoke of decades devoted to cataloguing human knowledge, proved remarkably cooperative when Holmes explained our official capacity through Lestrade's credentials. "Indeed, Mr. Grayson has been among our most dedicated patrons these past months," he observed, consulting his meticulously maintained ledgers with evident pride in their thoroughness. "His research has followed a most unusual pattern, focusing primarily upon crystallography, optical physics, and, most remarkably, historical accounts of gemstones possessing what the ancients termed supernatural properties." Holmes leaned forward with that intensity that marked his most crucial discoveries, his keen eyes scanning the detailed records of materials consulted. The pattern that emerged spoke of systematic intelligence gathering that extended far beyond mere criminal reconnaissance. Grayson had requested every available text dealing with crystals reported to possess unusual characteristics, cross-referencing these with treatises on pneumatic engineering, advanced mechanics, and the historical provenance of specific gemstones currently held in private collections. His most recent inquiries, the librarian continued, producing another ledger with bureaucratic satisfaction, concerned the acquisition histories and security arrangements of prominent collectors. He seemed particularly interested in the social connections of Lord Blackwood, Sir Reginald Ashworth, and Mr. Harrison Pembroke, requesting access to society journals and exhibition catalogues that detailed their display methods and personal habits. As we examined the materials Grayson had consulted, Holmes employed his magnifying glass to study the reading desk where our quarry had conducted his research. The blotter still bore faint impressions of his recent work, and Holmes applied his chemical knowledge to reveal ghostly traces of the man's handwriting. What emerged proved most illuminating: detailed calculations dealing with light refraction through complex crystal structures, optical formulae for creating controlled illusions, and most significantly, notations regarding catoptric chambers and shadow transfer mechanisms. "Observe this carefully, Watson," Holmes murmured, indicating a series of mathematical calculations in the margin of a treatise on crystallography. These formulae deal with the precise angles required to manipulate light itself using crystalline structures as focusing elements. Our criminal has developed techniques that create the illusion of impossible disappearances while concealing the actual method of removal through advanced optical principles. The revelation transformed our understanding entirely. The diamonds had not simply vanished through mechanical trickery, but through the application of sophisticated optical science that bordered on natural magic in its effects. Holmes discovered additional evidence in the form of a small leather case forgotten beneath one of the reading tables, its velvet interior bearing impressions of delicate optical instruments and traces of the specialized compounds we had encountered at previous crime scenes. Most significantly, Holmes's examination of various documents revealed a crucial discrepancy that had escaped previous notice. While the ransom notes and technical specifications bore the careful script of a right-handed individual, certain marginal notations in the research materials showed the distinctive characteristics of left-handed writing. "Two different hands, Watson," Holmes observed with evident satisfaction. "Our mastermind employs an intermediary for certain communications, yet cannot resist making personal annotations when engaged in scholarly research." The afternoon shadows were lengthening as Holmes began his preparations for what I sensed would be the crucial phase of our investigation. He dispatched urgent messages to Lestrade, arranging for surveillance of the museum and discreet inquiries among London's community of gemologists and optical instrument makers. To Lord Blackwood he sent a carefully worded request for the use of his study that evening, claiming the need to conduct certain experiments that might reveal the method behind the thefts. "Tonight, Watson," Holmes said as we departed the museum's hallowed halls, "we shall set a trap that appeals to our adversary's intellectual vanity as much as his criminal ambitions. A man who conducts such extensive research into the optical properties of rare crystals cannot resist the opportunity to observe a practical demonstration of the principles he has studied so thoroughly." Holmes spent the remaining daylight hours in meticulous preparation, creating what appeared to be a sophisticated optical apparatus using mirrors, lenses, and a specially prepared crystal formation that would seem to exhibit the same light-absorbing properties as the stolen diamonds. He positioned this decoy within Lord Blackwood's study, adjusting the gas lighting to create precisely the conditions that would require our quarry to reveal himself through the use of his specialized instruments. "The beauty of this stratagem, my dear fellow," Holmes explained as he made final adjustments to his arrangements, "lies in its appeal to both criminal greed and scientific curiosity. Our mastermind has demonstrated remarkable sophistication in his methods, but such sophistication invariably breeds intellectual pride. He will come not merely to steal, but to confirm his mastery of principles that few men in London truly understand." As evening approached and the fog began to lift from London's streets, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary nature of the conspiracy we had uncovered. This was no common theft ring, but an elaborate campaign orchestrated by someone whose knowledge of optical science rivaled that of the finest researchers in Europe. The shadows that had concealed our quarry for so long were about to yield their secrets, and Holmes's trap would soon reveal whether his deductive powers could match the criminal genius we pursued. "The game approaches its climax, Watson," Holmes observed as we took our positions for the night's vigil. "Our adversary has demonstrated exceptional cunning, but intellectual pride is the weakness of even the most brilliant criminals. When he steps into the light to examine our decoy, he will find that the shadows he has manipulated so skillfully have finally turned against him." The vigil in Lord Blackwood's study stretched through the small hours with that peculiar tension which marks the approach of long-sought revelations, each tick of the bracket clock seeming to count down toward a confrontation that would test even Holmes's remarkable powers against an adversary whose sophistication had become increasingly apparent throughout our investigation. Holmes had positioned the decoy apparatus with mathematical precision, its carefully arranged lenses and treated crystal formation creating an optical illusion so compelling that even I found myself glancing twice to confirm its artificial nature. The lighting had been adjusted to create precisely those conditions which would require our quarry to reveal himself through the use of specialized instruments, while Lestrade's men occupied strategic positions throughout the house with orders to remain concealed until Holmes's signal. We ourselves waited in the shadows behind the heavy velvet drapes, affording clear observation of both the display case and all approaches to the study. Shortly after midnight, the faintest metallic whisper announced the arrival of our adversary, the soft complaint of a skillfully manipulated lock yielding to expertise that spoke of long practice in such endeavors. The figure who entered through the French windows moved with that fluid precision which marked one intimately familiar with the room's layout, yet his approach to the display case revealed something far more significant than mere criminal intent. He carried what appeared to be a complex optical instrument of remarkable sophistication, its brass fittings and precision lenses gleaming in the gaslight as he began a systematic examination of Holmes's decoy. The device incorporated elements I recognized from our earlier discoveries: obsidian plates ground to mirror perfection, adjustable lenses arranged in a collapsible frame, and rubber tubing connected to a pneumatic bulb for creating controlled air pressure. "Ingenious craftsmanship," the intruder murmured to himself, his cultured voice carrying the unmistakable accent of education and refinement. Yet the refractive index is incorrect for true catoptric manipulation. This is merely clever stagecraft, not genuine optical science. Holmes stepped from concealment with that dramatic flair which marked his most significant revelations, his keen eyes fixed upon the man whose identity had remained hidden throughout our investigation. "Indeed, Professor Moriarty," he said with quiet satisfaction, "though I confess myself impressed by your ability to detect the deception so readily. Your reputation as a mathematician of extraordinary ability appears well deserved." The man straightened with fluid grace, his lean frame and intellectual features immediately commanding attention despite the circumstances of our confrontation. Professor James Moriarty possessed that peculiar magnetism which marked truly exceptional minds, whether devoted to creation or destruction, his dark eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed to encompass possibilities beyond ordinary comprehension. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," Moriarty replied with evident appreciation, setting down his optical instrument with careful precision. "I had wondered when London's celebrated consulting detective would penetrate the elegant simplicity of my recent endeavours. The systematic nature of your investigation has been most illuminating to observe." Holmes moved closer, his revolver steady, yet his manner suggesting genuine intellectual curiosity rather than mere triumph. "The precision of your methods, the sophisticated optical apparatus, the systematic campaign against London's most prominent collectors, all spoke of an organizing intelligence far exceeding that of common criminals. Yet it was your research at the British Museum under the alias Grayson that provided the crucial evidence. A man of your intellectual caliber cannot resist leaving traces of scholarly pursuits even when engaged in criminal enterprise." Moriarty smiled with that peculiar mixture of admiration and contempt which marked his attitude toward those he considered intellectual equals. "The study of crystalline optical properties has fascinated me since my Cambridge days, Mr. Holmes. The ancients possessed knowledge of crystal manipulation that modern science has barely begun to comprehend. These thefts were merely practical applications of theoretical principles, combined with certain mechanical innovations that rendered the impossible merely improbable." As if to demonstrate his meaning, Moriarty activated his optical device, projecting a concentrated beam of light that seemed to bend and twist through the air before striking the crystal decoy. For a moment, the entire apparatus appeared to shimmer and fade, creating the illusion that it had vanished entirely before reappearing as he adjusted the instrument's settings. "Catoptric chambers," Holmes observed with evident fascination despite the circumstances. "You discovered methods for bending light itself, creating zones of controlled invisibility that concealed the actual mechanical removal of the diamonds. The pneumatic apparatus concealed within the modified pedestals merely provided the physical means of extraction, while your optical science created the illusion of supernatural disappearance." "Precisely," Moriarty replied, his voice carrying that professorial tone which marked his explanations of complex principles. "Jonas Farley, operating under the alias M. Gray, modified the pedestals after delivery from Blackstone's workshop, creating sophisticated pneumatic chambers operated by precisely timed mechanisms. The combination of controlled suction and optical manipulation through treated obsidian surfaces created illusions that defied conventional understanding of physical law." Holmes nodded with that expression of complete comprehension, which marked his mastery of even the most complex deductions. The stolen diamonds possessed crystalline structures that made them ideal focusing elements for advanced optical work. Their value to you lay not in their monetary worth, but in their potential as components in apparatus that could revolutionize the manipulation of light itself. The ransom demands were merely misdirection, designed to suggest common criminal motives while concealing your true scientific purposes. Indeed, Mr. Holmes, the principles I have developed could render any object invisible at will, could create illusions that would confound the finest scientific minds in Europe. Imagine the applications for such technology, military, commercial, or purely criminal in nature. The sound of approaching footsteps announced Lestrade's arrival with his constables, though Moriarty showed no sign of concern at this development. Instead, he began dismantling his optical apparatus with methodical precision, as if preparing for an orderly departure rather than arrest. "You will find the stolen diamonds in a specially constructed vault beneath my private laboratory," Moriarty said conversationally, as Lestrade entered with his men. "The location is detailed in my personal correspondence, and I believe Lord Blackwood will be particularly interested in the modifications I made to his precious Carlachaya. The stone's light-absorbing properties have been considerably enhanced through certain crystalline treatments of my own devising." As the handcuffs clicked shut around Moriarty's wrists, he fixed Holmes with that penetrating stare which seemed to look directly into one's soul. "This has been most stimulating, Mr. Holmes, though I confess disappointment that our association must end so abruptly. The intellectual challenge you have provided has been quite refreshing after the tedium of dealing with Scotland Yard's conventional methods." Holmes watched with evident fascination as Lestrade led the professor away, his manner suggesting both satisfaction at the successful conclusion of the case and genuine regret at losing such a formidable intellectual opponent. "Watson," he said as the sound of departing footsteps faded into the night, "we have encountered a criminal whose sophistication exceeds anything in our previous experience. The methods he developed for these thefts represent genuine scientific advancement, albeit applied to thoroughly illegal purposes. The recovery of the stolen diamonds proved as remarkable as their disappearance had been mysterious. Each stone bore evidence of Moriarty's crystalline treatments, their optical properties enhanced in ways that contemporary science could barely comprehend. Lord Blackwood's Carlachaya, in particular, had been transformed into an instrument capable of bending light itself, its shadow-casting abilities magnified to an almost supernatural degree. Arthur Penrith, cleared of all suspicion through our revelations, expressed his gratitude with the quiet dignity of a man whose honour had been restored through truth rather than mere exoneration. The other victims, Sir Reginald Ashworth and Harrison Pembroke, received their treasures with that mixture of relief and wonder which marked their first true understanding of the extraordinary conspiracy that had targeted them. As we departed the Blackwood residence in the early hours of dawn, Holmes maintained that contemplative silence which invariably followed his most significant cases. The fog had finally lifted from London's streets, revealing a city that seemed somehow cleaner and brighter for the removal of Moriarty's malign influence. "The case of the stolen shadow has been concluded, Watson," Holmes said at length, his voice carrying that note of satisfaction which marked successful deduction. "Yet I confess myself troubled by the implications of what we have discovered. Professor Moriarty's research into optical manipulation represents knowledge that could prove extraordinarily dangerous in the wrong hands. We may have prevented these particular crimes, but the principles he developed will undoubtedly inspire other criminal enterprises in the future." As our hansom carried us back to Baker Street through the clearing morning air, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary nature of the conspiracy we had unravelled. What had begun as an impossible theft had revealed itself to be something far more significant, a glimpse into criminal possibilities that challenged the very foundations of physical law itself. Holmes settled into his familiar chair with evident relief, reaching for his pipe with that automatic gesture which marked the conclusion of his most demanding cases. The shadows have been restored to their proper place, Watson, and the light of justice has once again illuminated the dark corners where crime seeks refuge. Yet I suspect we have not seen the last of Professor James Moriarty. A mind capable of such innovation will not long remain confined by prison walls, and when he next emerges, I fear his ambitions will have grown considerably beyond mere theft of precious stones. The morning sun streamed through our windows at Baker Street, banishing the last traces of the fog that had shrouded London during our investigation, yet I could not shake the feeling that we had encountered forces whose true potential remained largely unexplored. The game, as Holmes would say, was indeed concluded, but the greater contest between order and chaos, between the light of reason and the shadows of criminal genius, would undoubtedly continue as long as minds like Moriarty's sought to bend the very laws of nature to their malevolent will.